Tensions erupted in a Dallas courtroom this morning as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett clashed with a sitting judge during a minor hearing, a confrontation that spiraled into a heated debate over systemic bias, courtroom power, and legal accountability. What began as a routine appearance quickly turned into a political and legal firestorm. The morning air outside the Dallas County Courthouse was thick with humidity and anticipation. Reporters weren't there for anything headline-worthy, at least not initially. Jasmine Crockett's name hadn't even made it onto the courthouse docket that morning in bold. She was scheduled for a minor procedural appearance over a citation involving a city code technicality, parking in a fire zone, during an emergency community outreach event in South Dallas 2 weeks earlier. Hardly newsworthy, a slap-on-the-wrist situation for anyone else. But Jasmine wasn't just anyone. As the representative for Texas's 30th Congressional District, she was known for her unfiltered honesty, sharp legal mind, and fierce commitment to accountability, especially where the justice system was concerned. She'd practiced law before she ever took office, and the courtroom was familiar ground. Today, however, she would find herself not just on the defensive, but in the middle of a confrontation that would expose the cracks beneath the polished marble of the judicial system. She arrived in the courtroom 22 minutes late. The delay wasn't just a matter of bad traffic or poor time management. Moments before she was set to leave for the courthouse, her office had received a call from a whistleblower at a privately run juvenile detention center, a facility located just outside her district. The tip was urgent. Reports of abuse, falsified reports, and missing oversight logs. Jasmine had been briefed on the bare bones of it while walking to her car, and then again on a secure call as she was en route. She'd decided to call in federal monitors before she'd even arrived downtown. As she entered the courtroom, all eyes turned. Her presence was magnetic, confident, though not performative. She walked with the calm urgency of someone who knew her priorities and wasn't in the mood for drama. The judge, Honorable Calvin M. Drexler, looked up from the bench, his face already shifting into a controlled scowl. A man known in legal circles for his old-school approach to courtroom decorum, Drexler didn't appreciate what he saw as disruptions, especially not from people he quietly viewed as too young, too bold, and too unwilling to know their place in the hierarchy of the legal world. He didn't wait long. "Ms. Crockett," he said, his voice oozing sarcasm as he glanced at the wall clock. "So very kind of you to finally join us," Jasmine responded coolly, standing straight. "Apologies, Your Honor. I was delayed due to an urgent matter involving a juvenile facility potentially engaged in federal violations. I deemed it necessary to respond immediately." Drexler leaned forward. "This court doesn't function on your schedule. I don't care if you were late because you were saving the planet. You were late. That's contempt." A murmur rippled through the room. Even the stenographer blinked twice. Jasmine's expression didn't shift. "With respect, Judge, contempt typically requires willful disobedience of a court order. My delay was not willful. It was the result of a public emergency." "I'll decide what qualifies," Drexler snapped. "You're fined $500 for contempt, payable by close of business today." There it was, the gavel's echo sharp and cold. She could have left it there, taken the fine, walked away. She was, after all, not the type to pick fights over pride. But something in Drexler's tone triggered a deeper current. It wasn't just about her lateness. It was about the way he'd said "you," as if it wasn't just Jasmine he was addressing, but what she represented. Youth, power, womanhood, blackness, politics, disruption. Jasmine stepped closer to the defense table, placing her hands lightly on its edge. Her voice remained calm. "May I ask if this court applies the same penalties to all late arrivals? Or just the ones it decides are worth making an example of?" Drexler sat back, nostrils flaring. "Are you questioning my impartiality, Ms. Crockett?" I'm questioning the consistency of this courtroom's standards, Your Honor, she replied. As an officer of the court, I believe I'm within my rights to do so. Another low buzz floated through the rows of observers, some of whom were now fully invested. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Drexler leaned forward again, the skin around his jaw tightening. "This is not Congress," he said slowly. "You do not cross-examine me." "I'm not cross-examining. I'm advocating for equal treatment under the law," Jasmine replied. "If a 22-minute delay results in a contempt charge, I'd like to review records from the last 12 months to see how many others were fined similarly." The judge's eyes narrowed. "That's not your place." "I believe it is," she said, her tone sharpening now, but still measured, "especially if this court has a pattern of punishing certain defendants more harshly than others based on age, gender, or background. That would indicate judicial bias, a matter very much within my place to question, both as a lawyer and a member of Congress." Drexler stood from his bench. "You're bordering on obstruction." "No," she said firmly. "I'm bordering on transparency. And if this courtroom doesn't welcome it, then perhaps it's time someone shines a light on why." He didn't respond. Not verbally. But something changed in the room. The tension became visible, electric. It wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about a courtroom where the rules didn't feel like they applied evenly. And everyone was watching. A court clerk, seated at the front, slid her eyes toward Jasmine, then back at her notes. A young public defender 2 rows back tapped something quickly into her phone. An older woman in the gallery, who'd been there to support her grandson's minor theft case, mouthed the word, "Wow." Outside the courthouse, cameras were already gathering. Inside, Judge Drexler took a breath and sat slowly back into his chair. His hands clasped together, fingers laced tightly. Jasmine remained still, unmoving. Then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, Drexler recessed the hearing. 10-minute break, he barked. Everyone out. But everyone knew. This wasn't over. The air was charged, and something had shifted. The quiet skirmish between tradition and truth had just begun, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. As the courtroom emptied for the unexpected recess, murmurs echoed off the stone walls. No one knew exactly what they'd just witnessed, but they all felt it. Something bigger than a simple contempt charge had been triggered. Jasmine remained near the defense table, arms crossed lightly, her eyes locked on the bench that now sat, empty. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't rattled. She was calculating. Behind her, a voice whispered, "Congresswoman, that was bold." Jasmine glanced over her shoulder. It was the young public defender from the back row, Eva Martinez, fresh, out of law school and already battle-worn from months of fighting for clients in a system that seemed wired against them. Jasmine gave her a slight nod and a faint smile, but her mind was still on Drexler. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When the bailiff finally stepped back into the room, his stance was stiff, as if bracing for an aftershock. "All rise." Drexler returned, face neutral, but colder than before. His robe swayed slightly as he took his seat, eyes never leaving Jasmine. "We will proceed," he said, "but let me make something very clear. This is not a platform for political grandstanding. You are here as a defendant, not a representative." "With respect, Your Honor," Jasmine replied. "My oath to serve doesn't stop at these courthouse doors." That did it. Drexler's hands slammed down against the bench, a sharp crack cutting through the room. "Enough. You're already in contempt. Keep pushing and I will escalate it." Jasmine didn't flinch. "Then escalate it. But while you do, understand that your record, every case, every ruling, every sentence you've passed, will be under scrutiny. If this courtroom punishes selectively, if it disciplines with prejudice, then that's not justice, that's control." He stared at her, jaw clenched. But behind his glare, something flickered. Fear or fury, it was hard to tell. The courtroom's energy shifted again, this time harder. The gallery wasn't just watching. Now, they were witnessing. Drexler straightened. "You have 5 minutes to make your case, then I will rule." Jasmine exhaled once and stepped forward. Not for herself, but for the record. My late arrival, while regrettable, was not without cause. I was responding to allegations that a juvenile detention facility in this state, funded with federal dollars, has been falsifying logs and denying medical attention to detainees. My office is preparing a full investigation, and I'll be contacting the Department of Justice today. But here, in this courtroom, I was fined for contempt without the judge asking a single clarifying question. She paused, letting the silence weigh the air. I've practiced law in this state. I've defended those who didn't have a voice, who never got the benefit of doubt. And I've seen what happens when a courtroom stops being about justice and starts becoming about power. This is not just about me being late. This is about how quickly this bench decided I was unworthy of context. She turned toward the gallery, scanning the faces that now watched her with rapt attention. And if that's how this court treats a sitting congresswoman with legal credentials, I can only imagine how it treats a black teenager who can't afford bail, or a mother who misses a court date because of childcare. Judge Drexler leaned forward, eyes burning. "You're walking a very fine line, Ms. Crockett, and you're standing on a crumbling one, Judge," she shot back. There it was. The room held its collective breath. A beat passed, then another. Drexler gritted his teeth and stood abruptly. "This hearing is suspended pending review. You are to remain available for a contempt escalation hearing. Bailiff, escort Ms. Crockett out." Jasmine didn't move at first. "You're suspending the hearing?" "Yes. And if you speak again, I'll remand you." She turned slowly, fixing him with one last measured look. "Make sure the transcript's clear. Everything I've said today will be public record." And, with that, she walked out. Outside the courtroom, the crowd had grown. News crews, legal observers, even staffers from the state capitol had gathered in a loose swarm, pulled by the gravity of something that felt historic. Reporters called her name, but Jasmine kept walking until she reached the steps. There she stopped and turned. "To be clear," she said to the cameras, "this morning I was cited for contempt for being late due to an emergency involving children in federal custody. I was told my job doesn't matter in court. I disagree. Because my job is to protect the people, and that includes challenging a system that no longer serves them fairly. What happened in there wasn't justice. It was punishment. And we need to talk about why." As reporters began shouting questions, her phone buzzed. A message from her chief of staff. "Media's already running with it. Drexler's record is trending. We've got former defendants reaching out. Legal orgs, too." She tucked the phone back into her pocket, jaw set. This wasn't going away, and she wouldn't let it. That afternoon, 3 civil rights organizations issued a joint statement calling for a formal review of Judge Drexler's courtroom conduct over the past decade. A petition launched online gathered 75,000 signatures in under 4 hours. By nightfall, national news anchors were replaying footage from the courthouse steps, and clips of the confrontation were circulating on social media with the hashtag #ContemptOfJustice. The real weight of it came later, though, when Jasmine's team received an anonymous tip. Drexler had a long-standing pattern of issuing contempt fines and harsh sentences disproportionately against young defendants and people of color. The tipster provided internal records, data not meant for public release. It was more than just a story now. It was an indictment of a system hiding behind protocol, and Jasmine Crockett had just kicked the door wide open. The following morning, the courthouse didn't feel the same. News vans lined the curb. Cameramen jockeyed for position under a gray sky heavy with anticipation. Protesters and supporters filled the sidewalks, some holding handwritten signs that read, "Justice is." Not contempt and equal under law. Really? The energy wasn't chaotic. It was focused, like a collective breath being held before something gave way. Inside, the Dallas County Courthouse buzzed with unusual urgency. Bailiffs were on edge. Clerks whispered as they passed folded papers between desks. And somewhere in the upper levels of the building, Judge Calvin Drexler sat in his chambers, flanked by two senior Judicial Review Board representatives who had arrived earlier than expected. His face was pale, locked in a performance of neutrality, but the air around him carried the weight of something inevitable. He'd read the headlines. Congresswoman confronts judge in courtroom clash over bias. Is contempt being used to silence dissent? Justice on trial. He'd seen the leaked data, too. The breakdown of his sentencing records over 15 years, laid bare in a digital dashboard now circulating among journalists and legal scholars. The numbers were damning. Contempt fines had been issued against young black defendants at a rate nearly triple that of white defendants. Sentencing disparities, denial of continuances for single mothers, even transcripts where his tone shifted when defendants used certain vernacular. It was all out now, and Jasmine Crockett was at the center of it. At precisely 10 a.m. she stepped back into that courtroom, same heels, same calm stride. But the silence was different this time. It wasn't suspicion she walked into. It was solidarity. Behind her sat not just legal aides and a few curious onlookers, but public defenders, elected officials, community organizers, and reporters crammed into the last available seats. Her nameplate hadn't been removed from the docket, but the title beneath it now had gravity. Jasmine Crockett, respondent. Motion to dismiss contempt and motion for judicial review. She took her seat. Her legal counsel, more symbolic than necessary, sat beside her. But Jasmine would be speaking for herself. Drexler entered to a courtroom transformed. He looked at the crowd, saw the cameras trained through the glass window on the door, and instinctively adjusted his robe. He cleared his throat before beginning. But before he could speak, Jasmine rose. "Your Honor," she said, firm and measured, "I'd like to make a brief statement before we proceed." Drexler blinked, hesitated, then gestured with a shallow wave. "Proceed." Jasmine turned slightly to face the room but kept her eyes forward. This courtroom was never supposed to become a battlefield. But when due process becomes secondary to ego, and when bias hides behind procedure, someone has to say something. I did not come here to be a symbol. I came here to take responsibility for a citation, and to do so respectfully. What followed exposed something far deeper, an uneven standard of justice that punishes people not because of their actions, but because of who they are. She paused, eyes scanning the room. This isn't just about me. It's about every defendant who stood here and was silenced. Every person who was fined, jailed, or lectured not for breaking laws, but for daring to challenge the comfort of authority. She sat, for a moment. The room was still. Drexler inhaled slowly. "Ms. Crockett, this court has reviewed the procedural events of the last 48 hours. In light of recent developments, and at the recommendation of the Judicial Conduct Oversight Committee, the contempt charge has been vacated." No applause, just silence. He continued. "Furthermore, this courtroom will be subject to an independent audit of its case history. During that time, I will be taking a leave of absence." That was as close to a fall as a man like Drexler would ever admit aloud. The gavel tapped once, but it sounded hollow now. Its authority cracked. As he stood to leave, Jasmine looked up at him. Not with vengeance, not even satisfaction. Just recognition. He met her eyes for the first time without the mask of authority. And perhaps, for a moment, he understood that he'd miscalculated more than just courtroom decorum. The news hit within minutes. The headlines were swift. Judge steps down amid bias investigation. Crockett's courtroom clash sparks reform wave. Contempt overturned. justice re-examined. But what followed in the weeks ahead was far more than symbolic. The Texas Judicial Commission, under mounting public pressure, announced the launch of a statewide audit into courtroom practices with a focus on bias in sentencing and contempt rulings. The American Bar Association stepped in to offer new training guidelines for judges across the country, and Congress, spurred by growing public momentum, held a hearing titled Bias in the Courtroom: From Bench to Sentence. Jasmine Crockett testified, not about herself, but about the patterns she'd seen for years, about the kids pulled into a system designed to break them, about single mothers juggling 2 jobs being penalized for missed hearings, about how justice, when wielded without empathy, ceases to be just. 1 month later, a bill co-authored by Crockett and 2 other representatives was introduced, the Judicial Transparency and Equity Act, mandating bias training, quarterly courtroom data reviews, and the creation of independent oversight boards at the county level. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Back in Dallas, the courtroom didn't stay empty long. A new interim judge, younger, with a reputation for reform, took over the docket. He dismissed 3 standing contempt charges in his first 2 days, each against defendants who'd been late due to circumstances outside their control. Jasmine never returned to that courtroom as a defendant again, but her presence lingered. Not in name, not in legacy. She had little use for monuments. It lingered in the way the court clerk now asked a few more questions before filing a contempt charge, in the way the young public defender, Eva Martinez, began documenting every discrepancy. She saw and filing formal complaints without hesitation, and in the way defendants, once silent, once fearful, started speaking up because one moment, one voice, one refusal to bow had pulled back the curtain. And through that opening, something new had begun to grow. Not a revolution, but accountability. Not vengeance, but equity. Not just a courtroom showdown, but a reckoning. The gavel had fallen, but this time, justice echoed louder.